Hello, everyone. Welcome to Arise with Grace, the podcast that celebrates and empowers the stories of strong, resilient women of faith who have moved from surviving to thriving and from pain to promise. I am your host, Phoenix Grace. I've been through both literal and figurative fires in my life. In the midst of my wilderness season, God told me, "You have walked through fire and survived. Now you will rise from the ashes and thrive." So I did. Now I have made it my mission to help empower women to be who they were created to be and live life in full bloom: physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health. Good morning, everyone. I am here with my beautiful friend and colleague, a person I admire a great deal. My guest today is Daniella Ordonez. Daniella is a story creation coach who helps women tell their story through book writing and self publish to Amazon. She is passionate about helping them leave behind a legacy and receive healing and breakthrough in as quickly as 90 days. Welcome, Daniela. I am so grateful to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So, first of all, tell me about your name, Daniela. Is there a meaning behind it, a special story? What can you tell us about your name?
Yeah, so my name means God is my judge. And growing up, I didn't really like my name actually. And I found it interesting because I know we're going to talk about it a little later about coming back to the Lord. But when I had connected back with the Lord, He had drawn me to learn more about my name and the connection that my name has with the prophet Daniel in the Bible. And so I was able to get a lot of new
Mm.
things about identity with that. So that was a really great blessing.
Oh, so good. So good. Yeah, so God is my judge. It helps speak into your identity now as well. I looked up Ordonez and it said it's derived from the Latin personal name Fortunio, which means fortunate, right? So
Hmm.
that's really cool. I thought that was really neat. So tell
So
me, Daniela, tell me a little bit about your early life. So now you're a story creation coach. You're, you know, I see this radiant woman of God. Was that always how you felt inside? Is that how you grew up? Did you know you were
yeah.
destined to be this story creation coach?
No, well, I didn't know that I was destined to do that for sure. My life has definitely taken a lot of ups and downs, and some has been quite a journey. But all this is going to probably connect back to the Daniel revelation or Daniela revelation that the Lord gave me. But growing up, I grew up in the
Okay.
church, but I also grew up with a big love for books. I used to love to read. We always I always joke because my mom always tells this joke that she says whenever I was growing up, she would always have to take a book away from me. She's like, I felt terrible as a mom because you didn't care if I was like, oh, no TV or none of this. It was always I needed to know what happened in the next chapter, and I was so upset if I didn't find out. That was more torture than anything else. So I always loved to read. I remember I used to have like several books at once, and I would hide them under my pillows, like lights out. And I had this little book, those little clip on lights. Do you remember those little book reading lights? And I used to clip one of those on, and I would read. And then I see my mom come like hide my book. It's supposed to be asleep for school the next day. Make jokes all the time. I would even in my second, third grade classes, I used to be a really good student. I used to have really good grades, but um, I would keep my book inside of my desk. Like this is how attached I was to just reading and really loving stories and loving books in general. So having gone through that I can see that now as that was something that God had placed in me from a young age. Um, but I had definitely gone through a period of time where I had gone away from the Lord. I when I got into, I want to say,
Mhm.
probably like middle school, going into high school. I had a lot of things going on at home. I had moved to a new state. There's a lot of things that were going on. But at that time, I had moved back to New York to live with my dad. So my dad pretty much raised me up from 12 years old and up. And that, of course, had its pros, but it also had its cons. Being raised by mostly by a father. My mother had breast cancer,
Mhm.
so it was a really difficult time for her to raise up my sister and I together. And so during that time, there was definitely uh, a loss of the identity that I think was being built at a young age. Um, and so, yeah, so that was really difficult. And my book definitely came out of that. The first book that I wrote, which is Faith Crushed in the Classroom. Um, so yeah, I know I'm saying a lot, so I don't know if you want to interject, Felix. You're more than welcome. But that's pretty much the
No,
the
no, that's
beginning
good.
parts of things. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, so I hear like you had a switch from being raised in the church, you moved to a different state, different having
Mhm.
father instead of like in a lot of, you know, family, like with your mom's illness and things like that. Um,
Yeah.
so how did you cope with all that? Like you said
Not
that
well.
you drifted away a bit from God.
Yeah,
Not well.
I definitely didn't cope very well with it. So having gone from that experience of childhood of like having really good grades and wanting to read all the time and just, going to church, I used to be really interested in God and the things of God. I was actually baptized the first time at 9 because my pastor was like, "You're like mature for a 9-year old, especially
Wow.
when it comes to these things of God." But then when that happened with my mom, I had moved with my dad, and then from there, it was a totally different shift. Like everything was completely different. You're going from, you know, Pennsylvania to Brooklyn, so totally different experience.
Mhm.
But at that time, it was more feeling like that loss of identity. I didn't really know who I was at that point. I was really trying hard to fit in with the
Okay.
people that were around me, trying to find my place. There's so much diversity as well as going to, public school in Brooklyn. There's so much diversity, and trying to figure out where I fit in that. Um, and I never really felt like I had a place that I fit because I was, half growing up in one place. Now I'm coming into another place, but I'd always had that experience of kind of going back and forth in between these two experiences and two worlds. Um,
Mhm.
but when I had, and I had a good upbringing in the sense of, I went to a private high school. My dad invested for me to do that, but the the spiritual growth wasn't there. It was basically like being in a public school with a uniform. There wasn't so much of that imparted to me, the things that I
Right.
understand and
Okay.
know now. They did a good job of helping me to get into a college. Like that was great, smaller class sizes and all of that. But when it came to issues in
Mhm.
curriculum, so
Mhm.
the way Christians are painted in history classes, for example, or when it comes to the way, like when you read certain things in literature or certain questions that you had, there was really no answer to some of those deep questions that I had. I was always inquisitive, never could really find the answers to those things. So then when I had gone on to college, I still had that curiosity. I still had those questions. I still had that kind of burning desire to know more about God and to know more about just life and trying to understand the balance between my upbringing when I was a child and what I had learned there and seeing my mom go through these, I've seen miracles happen in my mom's life when she had the cancer, and then being taught something totally different in a school setting that seemed like it completely conflicted with my upbringing but also wanting to fit in. So it was definitely a very interesting pull between the two. Um, and that's where my book was birthed out of that, the faith crush in the classroom. That's part of the testimony. I had felt the Lord starting to draw me back. I had gone so far away from God. I mean, to the point of, and I talk about it in the book. I know you were mentioning maybe if I wanted to read a bit, I don't mind. But I had gone so far away from
Yeah,
the
yeah, for
Lord
sure.
because of those thoughts that I was having, those beliefs of, you know, um, like, why would there be suffering if there was a good God, or why would these things be allowed to happen? I had all these kind of questions. And then, having gone through my own difficult experiences growing up, I had a very harsh judgment against the church because I'd always felt a call to leadership when I was little in my life, but I would be called bossy, and, oh, you're supposed to be this way. And so that made me connect with like modern feminism, and how that looks. And
As a
because I
woman, as a
always,
girl.
as a,
Yeah,
yes, yeah, big
yeah,
time. And especially because like I said, I did pretty good in my classes. I used to love to learn knowledge, and the way that the enemy used the religious system is what I'm going to say, because religion's obviously different than that relationship we have with Christ. But the way that he would use that spirit of religion to lie to little girls and say, you're not allowed to speak, or you're not allowed to even
yeah.
teach or to do any of these things. And it had gone so far against what I had felt from a young age. I'm like, am I wrong? Because I always wanted to teach. It was funny. I would line up my animals in my room and I would literally teach them whatever I was reading. So I'm like, these were things that I just felt naturally that God had placed in me,
Oh,
right? And I'm like, these are things that God had placed in me.
I love
And
it.
here's what I believed was the church at that time telling me I'm not allowed to do those things. And I was
Mhm.
like, but this feels like it goes so counter to the leadership that I know that I was placed. It doesn't make me a bossy person. I had to break off all of those lies and those beliefs
Yes,
that I was just a bossy little girl. I always had to have my way or this and that. I'm like, no, God has put a leadership anointing on me. God has placed
yes,
certain things on me
amen.
that I didn't have somebody in my teen years to say, I recognize those things in you, and let me help develop
Yeah,
them. So instead, I had gone the
yeah,
path that the enemy was like, hey, you can go this way, and how you
yeah,
feel and all that, go this
yeah.
way.
You took
Um,
on the spiritual, the counterfeits that the enemy created that was a copy, a
exactly.
like, a I think of like, have you ever done a photocopy of a photocopy? And it keeps
Yes,
getting lighter and lighter and lighter and more distorted? That is the
that's
enemy.
right.
That is what the enemy does. He makes a copy of a copy of a copy, and it's a lie, right? And you found
That's
that
right.
out. Like that such it sounds like you had such the word the that society uses, like a cognitive dissonance between, what is right, like
Yep.
internally, okay, so this is how God created me, or that you have the strong stance, right? And then
Yeah.
what the church that you conflate with maybe what God wants, because it's what of, like the religion is what of church, right? And
Yes.
but it's legalism, it's rules, it's not matching up with your inner experience. So you go to the world and try to find what the world offers. And I found that too in my own life. The church is doing a disservice to people.
Yes.
So I'm so
Yeah.
grateful that you were able to break off those things. So tell me
Well, I
more.
will.
Tell me more.
Yeah. No, I will say that it's interesting when I look back and I think about how those lies came in at such a young age, because I was probably I would say I was probably about maybe 4 or 5 years old when I remember someone for the first time telling me, like, you need to not be a little bossy girl. And I was like, me, like a little like what? So what their definition of bossy was somebody who would, let's say we wanted to pick teams, and I'd say, okay, you on this team, you can go on this team. And like nobody took the time to say that's a natural leadership ability. They looked at that and they said, you're bossy. And I'm like, that like stuck with me and it used to bother me so badly. And then but then I would see that, the males in my class, they were praised for that. And I do believe in, in terms of traditional senses, like a man does have the ability, there is leadership qualities, especially when thinking about a marriage, right? Like I think about my husband, I want him to lead. There's certain things that it's not that I can't do that. I can absolutely lead, but
Yeah.
the enemy would use those, would manipulate the difference between a relationship between a husband and wife versus there are female leaders in the Bible. You have Deborah, you have Esther, right? You have Priscilla. There's so many examples of
Mm.
women who have this leadership on them, right? And so that, but I didn't have any context or reference of those things. And so I just believed that I had to be like a man in order to lead, in order to be successful, in order to, hey, like that's what I was supposed to do. I need to be like this or above that. And that's the enemy's lie. And so I know we didn't really plan on probably talking
Yeah.
about the feminism side of things, but
No,
I
no,
think
this
it's
is
so
good.
relevant.
No?
I think it's so relevant today because there's so many, young girls out there that need to figure out what is their voice, what is it that God has called them to do, and to not shrink back, but also to embrace your femininity and know that it doesn't mean you have to be a man in order to
Absolutely.
be a leader. It doesn't mean that you have to be a man in order to
Yeah.
step into what God has for you and to lead other people and to have impact. And so much of, I think that was probably one of the core lies, because that legalistic spirit also said that I was not allowed to teach. I know in my heart God called me to teach. There's My mom still has from kindergarten. They're like, "What do you want to be when you're older?" And I said, "A teacher." And I had one from second grade, a teacher. Third grade, it was like the same year after year. And most kids change. They're like, "I want to be a doctor, a ballerina. I want to be a," every year for me it was,
Right?
"I want to be a teacher." Right? Every year. So here comes the enemy saying, "You can't teach, you can't speak, you can't lead, you can't do all those things if it's for God. So why don't you do it for me?" And I would fight you tooth and nail to fight for what I guess people would call liberal ideology. I would debate you until I won. Like that. Talk about using, you know, a gift that God has
Wow.
given us, right? Talk about using a gift, but in the wrong way, like you said, like the counterfeit. And that was big time what my experience was. And so,
Yeah.
but God had to bring me to this place of coming to the end of myself, where all of my strivings, all of my versions of what I thought was the right thing, it left me in this place of frustration and anger and emptiness. And it actually led me to a place of, I had a lot of self hatred. There was a lot of things I was very disconnected from, you know, um, my true identity as that Daniel, right? And this is where I'm going to bring it back full circle. You're asking about the name.
Yeah.
Um, that when I first came back to the Lord, I actually
Yeah.
had a radical deliverance. God had been little by little
Oh,
separating
wow.
people from
Okay.
me that were pulling me into terrible things. So I had my best friend actually at that time. She started to get into tarot cards and witchcraft and all this stuff. And I had, I had some crystals. I never really got into like doing spells or anything like that, but I had been opening myself up to horoscope and things that were connected to witchcraft, but I didn't know that that's what it
Yeah.
was at that time. I just thought, hey, I believe in natural
Yeah.
remedies. I think that, I'm not a big fan of modern medicine. So all those things that had a sense of truth to
So
them,
it drifted
it was
that
the
way.
counterfeit.
Yeah.
Right, of course,
Grain
exactly.
of
And then
truth. Yeah.
that need for power, right? That need to feel powerful, to have a voice, to have all those things that I
Mhm.
felt at that time were taken from me. The enemy offers to you through liberal ideology, and then
Yeah.
through what you're doing is really you're embracing witchcraft eventually. Um, and so I actually had a radical deliverance from the Lord. He had started to draw me little by little. He had tried to take, at that time, like was trying to separate me from my boyfriend at the time. My best friend had just gotten mad at me after, like, we were friends since ninth grade. And this is talking about my first year of my master's. So we've been friends for a long time.
Wow.
Totally just ignored, deleted my
Mhm.
phone number, never talked to me. I'm like, what is going on? And I felt like little by little, when there's like I hate to use the word spiritual awakening because it can sound new agey, but it's not. But there's this inner
Mhm.
awakening
Mhm.
that
I
happens
know
that
what
God
you mean,
starts to,
though. Yes. Yes.
right, where He starts to wake you up in the spirit to things that you have,
Wake
I
up,
guess,
sleeper. Daniela, wake up,
right.
sleeper.
Right, right. And so he had started to do that, and it was little by little. And then I had a radical deliverance. I was sitting in my car, getting ready to, I was tutoring at the time, getting ready to go. And I just sat there, and then I was watching this video, and I was like, man, like, I don't know, this video is really strange. It was a video that had to do with like looking at signs of like the like witchcraft or stuff like that, and but it was actually a Christian video. I'm like, I don't even know how I found it, but it was interesting. So I'm watching this, and all of a sudden it felt like this veil just like lifted off of me, and I just started crying. I was like, my whole like just face just hysterical crying, and I started repenting. I was like, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. And it wasn't audible to the sense of like hearing like a physical voice, but it was like that inner knowing. And I felt what it talks about in Galatians 5
Yes.
22 to 23 for the first time. I felt the fruit of the spirit. I felt joy, peace. I'm like, what is this? I've never experienced this before. I was in the actual presence of God at that moment. Things lifted. It was and then I went 2 days, 2 to 3 days. God started just cleansing me. I felt like a fire burning through my body. You could touch my body. It looked like I had sunburn. I
Wow.
felt a fire burning through my entire body, and I was just like things were coming out of me. Like just little by little things just started drawn out of me. And it was from there, it was like total 180. I was for the Lord. It was an impartation of knowledge. I hadn't opened my book. I mean, I used to read some Revelation, because what 9-year-old reads Revelation? But I used to read some book of Revelation. I used to read Psalms and Proverbs, but that's about it. I really didn't read that much of the
My
Bible growing
son.
up like that. Okay, so the same way. I really didn't read that much growing up, but after that had happened, it was like this
Revelation,
impartation of,
Daniel. Yes.
yes, yes. And God said, I want you to read the book of Daniel. This is your namesake. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to go look. And Daniel was studied, and he was good at literature. I was like, oh, Lord, it makes sense. And it makes sense why the devil wanted me to hate my name my whole life. I literally hated my name my whole life. I'm like, what? I wanted to change it. I'm like, can I legally change my name? And now here I am getting a revelation of my name. And it was huge. That was a huge changing point for me.
Wow.
I know
What?
I
That's
dropped
so
a lot
good.
on you, Phoenix.
Yeah. Oh. No, no, this is great. Especially the revelation that Daniel, like I said, my son, he's 11, but he's in church, he's reading, he's always wanted to stay in the adults. Like he hasn't wanted to go down with the kids. He stays in the service.
That was
He
me.
reads
Yep.
Revelation, he reads Daniel, all the prophets. Yeah, wow.
That's awesome.
We're gonna have a whole other conversation about this.
Oh
So,
yeah.
okay, so you had this radical, like incredibly radical, and so then you turned 180, well, to God, you said.
Yeah.
I think I'm Italian too, Daniela. I keep knocking down my
It's
light with my
hands.
hands. It's, so you had this 180. So what happened then? Like where was this? Is this when you started to question, like you said you're in your master's, were you starting to question what you were being
Oh yeah.
taught? And like tell me about that.
Yeah, big time. Actually, I had been in, so prior to that, I had started to think about, I was really getting drawn into the deception, because I do believe that there's a deception, right? That the world believes, a lot of that's connected to New Age. A lot of what we learn in school in atheistic humanism is the foundation or the belief layers that are needed in order for this, what I call the coexist, right? The ecumenical move, like all of that, for all of that to be connected in the enemies, because God brings unity, but then there's the enemy's version of unity, right? So it's always like you,
Right.
like the counterfeit. And in order for that to be received, the education system has been used by people who are functioning in ignorance. They're not aware, right? Because they don't know God. And because they don't know God, they're spouting these
Mhm.
lies that are laying the foundation for that system, right? That system that is not of God to come forward and for people to believe. Most people on a, I mean, like on a societal basis, most people truly do believe in what is Satanism. You know, it's do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Do what you want to do, follow your heart, and just do it. Like it's okay. Don't worry about the consequences. You worry about you. I worry about me. And a lot of that is being reinforced through atheistic humanism, which is basically you put your child in school in kindergarten. By the time they come out of, they've gone through probably high school or at least college. A lot of people are going to college these days. By the time they finish college, especially, you come out with a certain belief system. And the book, this is Faith Crushed in the Classroom. This is the one where I talk about this, both from the perspective of somebody who had gone through the experience, but also as a teacher, because I did teach. I taught in New York City. I used to teach seventh and eighth grade. I also had experience teaching ninth to 11th grade. So I've had a pretty hefty, you know, handful. And I talk about those experiences here from both aspects, from, even meeting with other teachers when we'd have professional developments. These weren't professional developments about how you can become a better teacher. These are professional developments about how well you could be versed on critical race theory or how.
So it lost
Okay.
connection. So this is interesting. This is interesting. You started talking about your book. The tech got all wonky. There is
Hmm.
resistance against this message coming out. The enemy is not happy. So let's
Yep.
shatter down those walls, blow it away,
Okay.
continue on. Tell me
I
what you
will.
have to tell me.
Yes. So what I was mentioning was that from the aspect, so this really covers two aspects. It covers me, like as this person. This is not me, but it's a representation of what I'd gone through. The 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 battle between being a person of faith. There's my Bible, right? Being a person of faith and being in a classroom where everybody's telling you you're hateful and you're wrong and you're this and you're that and you have to accept this, and if you don't accept this and you don't believe
Yeah.
this, then there's something wrong with you and wrong with your God. And like that was the battle, because those seeds were planted when I was young. Yes, I had gone through a lot of pain and things, but it was still there. And I talk about in the book how I sat in front of a professor who was helping me to write my thesis. And I sat there and I said, how do you, because this was a Catholic college, okay? I said, how do you balance this? Like, let's say, how do you balance this, what you read in literature? Okay, he was, what you read in literature, and this is somebody who was considered a brother. He was called brother. I'm not going to finish his name, but somebody who knew from that aspect of religion. Religion had some semblance of faith, right? I mean, I didn't grow up Catholic.
Right.
Love you guys anyway, but I didn't grow up. I grew up evangelical. Evangelical Christian. But because I went to a Catholic college, I said, okay, this person's a brother. He obviously believes in enough of faith in order to have gone that direction. So maybe he has something that can help balance, like what I'm learning in literature versus what I'm learning, what they say about God versus what I believe here. So I asked him this question, and he looked at
Right.
me and he said, I just don't let the two mix. And I was like, how can they not mix?
Oh boy.
How can they not mix? How can you have a certain belief as a follower of Jesus, as somebody who sees things from a biblical worldview, and not think that that
Mhm.
mixes with an opposing view? And I'm not saying you can't have an opposing view, but
Right.
I was having a faith crisis, and he was just telling me, well, I don't know. I'm like, if you don't know, I definitely
Wow.
don't know. And this was before,
Wow.
the Lord gave me that radical deliverance and the revelation and the insight.
See,
But uh-huh.
that that blows me away, Daniela, because I did some, education. I started taking a master's degree, and
Mhm.
it was social work, but they very much like the push was examine your biases. When you're doing research, you say what your bias, like how that just seems such a, even in the natural, such an unaware statement. Like your biases, your worldview is absolutely going to impact, right? Like
Yeah.
even from an academic standpoint, to say, oh,
Yes.
just divorce it, cut it away, like that doesn't even seem
Yeah.
academically sound, let alone.
No, because of course your worldview is going
um,
to impact the way that you read. I mean, we would have, being that my background is in English literature, we would literally read a text from five different perspectives: the feminist, the Marxist, the this, the that. Like you had to literally take that lens and read the text. So the fact that you're, about the
mhm,
biblical
mhm.
worldview, but you just said about checking your bias, and you know what? It's true unless you're a Christian. If you're a Christian, then you're just hateful and you have all the biases, and that it just, that's how it comes across. And what I was sharing was, I talk about three different perspectives. I talk about the perspective of like me being basically this person in the classroom setting. I talk about the perspective of, as an outsider, like looking back at that situation and what I probably could have done differently to have been more equipped to stand more firmly. Because most of these kids, one of the things I also do, I serve with my husband. My husband is the leader of the teen ministry at our church. And so I support with that ministry as well. And we see these teenagers and they have
Okay.
so many questions. And statistically, three-quarters of those that come out of most youth programs do not serve the Lord afterwards. I think it's actually higher than that, but I know that it's at least three-quarters that come out. And why is that? It's because they're being fed and indoctrinated and lied to through the education system. The other aspect is as a teacher, because I'd gone through professional developments, and this is what I was saying before the connection started to go wonky. And those professional developments weren't teaching teachers how to be better teachers. It wasn't about how do I learn, how do I grow to make my classroom, to grow in pedagogy, right? To grow in different ways of knowing how to teach. Like, let's help with memory. How do we help with somebody who has a processing delay or whatever it is? It wasn't that.
Right.
It was, how
Not the
well can you
practical.
spout?
Yeah.
Right. It was, how well can you spout liberal ideology? How well can you make your classroom so inclusive that if I want to identify as a cat, I can do that? And I'm not allowed to tell you anything else. That's what we were being told. I talk about this situation here. There's a specific situation where I asked a question, and the training was on critical race theory. And during that training, the person came and they said, we watched a video and it talked about how race is a social construct, right? Everything is a social construct. It's constructed by society to say race is a social construct. So I said, okay, and I'm like, and I asked the question. I said, that makes sense because in the video as well, it did talk about how, and I said, I believe we're one human race, and that there's variations within the given race. We're all humans, right? And there's different variations based on skin, the melanin in the skin, the eye color, the hair texture. These things vary, but we're all human. We're all humans, right? So in terms of thinking of definitions, but they have
Yeah.
totally redefined everything. That the woman looked at me and she said, "You are colorblind." I said, "I'm colorblind." I said, "I don't think I'm colorblind." I said, I'm just saying, I was, you asked about what we thought about the video in this training, and I'm telling you, I think it's interesting to think about it as a social construct, because I mean, really, we're all one race. And I was shut down for saying that we are one race. That is biologically accurate,
Wow.
right? Like that is biologically, and I talk about that and
Yeah.
how, I mean, that's only one of the things and the impact that it's having on the
Well, it
students.
is. Yeah, for sure.
what I'm saying is that, and my students understood this, and it's amazing that my students had um more, I want to say, even wisdom at their 12 and 13 years than some of my colleagues, and it was astounding to me, just to the point of throwing away basic developmental science for the name of an ideology, right? For the name of that. I mean, I'm talking about things like, it's basic teaching about the frontal lobe. When you go to education training, it's basic teaching that your frontal lobe, right, your ability to make decisions, that's not fully processed until 21, and in some cases 25 years old. That is a basic
Right?
thing you,
Yep.
but yet we were spending hours upon hours upon hours putting down good teachers who had excellent results, great classroom culture, really good connections, right, with their students. And we were setting them up to be literally attacked. Like, if I tell you, like, I was not the only one, there were a couple other people who had a similar mindset as I did just about some of these things. And they were straight up attacked. I had the guidance counselor, I remember this. One of the guidance counselors at one of the schools that I worked at, she told me that if a white student came into her room, they would not have the same trauma as a black student. And I said, I would never send my student who is struggling to you to get guidance because you would minimize their trauma. It's like,
Yeah.
this is happening, Phoenix.
Well, as someone
So,
with a social work degree, that just blows my mind too, right? Like
and that's what's
that's
happening.
not
And it's it's a level of who can be the biggest victim. That's what's happening in the schools. And they're teaching students victimization. They're not teaching them how to really step into who they are, step into their identity, to go into what they're going to be successful with, to it's about, how can I exit this organization, this, not even organization, but this structure. How can I come out of this feeling more victimized, feeling more powerless to engage in a world that you are not ready for, that's going to eat you up. That's what's happening. And that's why we need the Lord. That's why we need God to tell us and impart true identity to us. That's why you need strong leaders who are both, yes, there are female leaders who are strong, who can speak to these things, but where are the Christian voices? And this is what I believe God raised me up for. Where are the Christian voices who are out there who are teaching? Because listen, the Bible says to teach children in the way that they should go. That is a huge, yes, there's a father's responsibility, but there's a mother's
Yeah.
responsibility. There's a female's responsibility to impart wisdom to children. So when your kids are going to school and they are being completely indoctrinated, moms, this is where we need to do a better job of teaching our children in the way that they should go. And it's an unfortunate thing of society, because we do our best, we try to impart. My mom did her best. My mom was a single mom. My mom was doing the job. I mean, she could never be a father, but she was doing the job of two people, right, trying to do the job of two people and battling cancer. So she was not able to impart the wisdom to me the way that she probably wanted to. So she did her best. She took me to church, she did these things.
Right.
but but what's happening is, women are being pulled out of their homes. Okay, they're being pushed more into the work field to go work 40, 50, 60, sometimes 80-hour weeks. And there's nothing wrong with having a calling on your life. There's nothing wrong with wanting to embrace, but not at the detriment of your children. Okay. And I'm saying this as a mom. I'm saying this as somebody who
Right.
has two children. My prayer and my heart's desire was that I could be set up in a situation where God would help me to maybe, have my own business, to do something, so I can be home with my children, so I can set my schedule and I don't have to push them through this system. I did not want them in this system. With whatever I could do, and I'm going to tell you that now, not that God can't work, but there's a struggle if your child is in this system. They're basically setting up your children
Yeah.
to come home and to be at odds with you. And I know in Canada, if you identify as transgender in Canada and your parents say no, your parents can get arrested. That's the type of parental rights that are being lost And how are you going to fight with your child at that point? You can't. And so really, and this is where my heart's desire is in the business. We're in this place of expansion and hiring people and bringing people in. My goal, what I want to do in this leadership place, is to hire moms so they can stay at home, so they can raise up their
Right.
kids, so they can impart these things into their children, because the next generation is where all of the power is. If you can, and I don't remember who said it, I think it was something like Hitler or somebody who said that basically they go for the next generation. Why? Because if you can get the next generation, you have the direction, the course of history. And so this is where moms and
That's
women need
true.
to be empowered to know their identity, to empower their children to boldly stand up for what they believe. Some kids are called to be in these systems, but they can't be if their relationship with Christ is not rock solid, that they don't know who they are, if they don't feel accepted, they don't feel loved, they don't feel that they have a purpose. They're going to find it in the education system, and the education system is going to affirm whatever they believe at that moment, because that's how it is. It's, I'm going to
Yeah.
affirm you, whatever you think, whatever you believe, that's who you are. It's always a question of who are you? And God will tell you who you are. But you have to take that time, that step. And I don't want anyone listening to this to hear from a place of condemnation. I am a very direct person, and I tell you this in
Right.
so much love. Don't hear this from a lens of condemnation. We all do our best. Like I said, I came from a single mom household. My mom did the best that she could with what
Yeah.
she had. But it's an unfortunate reality, because we have to look at this
Yeah.
from a spiritual aspect.
And when you're a single mom, you have to work the way it is, right?
You have to. And looking from a spiritual aspect, what does the enemy do? He breaks up families, because he knows that if he can break up a family, if he can remove a father out of the situation. And usually what tends to happen is, yes, there's single fathers, but in most cases it's the mom that ends up in that situation, having the children and having to now take on extra responsibility, cannot give the same level no matter how much they try. It's stressful for them, it's hard for them. So I believe God is helping in part of this, especially for those who come from single parent households or may find themselves in that situation. There's a life out there that you don't have to slave at a job for 80 hours a week. I believe in God is raising up people to own businesses, to coach, to mentor, to do these things, to bring some source of income in, so that you can still be able to impart those things to your children in the way that it was intended to be.
Tell me how you changed from going to school and being a teacher and your life now, what that's about. And then we'll talk about your um, the Bible verse and what you want to share with the audience.
Okay, sounds good. I mean,
Okay?
it's amazing the resistance just
And hope
with
we're
trying
saved and hope it will save.
to do this. It's okay.
Right?
So
So,
no worries. But bringing things kind of full circle, it's because of that. What some people would say, that stubbornness, right? That bossy child, whatever that you say, that people would say that I was. I think a lot of that's a strength and a resilience and a determination to not conform. I was definitely a nonconformist, as the enemy would try to set up like a little rebel. But in that sense of like not wanting to conform, I did conform or obey when it comes to the Lord, because that's a whole different situation. But He used that strength to help bring me through a really difficult time, which was when the vaccines happened, the mandatory vaccines happened. I was teaching at that time, but I felt that there were signs where God was, starting to direct me out of teaching. And the book was actually getting ready to get released. There were so many things. It was very interesting and timetable wise. I was just going into the editing process and publishing when I had left teaching. But I was really forced out with the vaccine mandates. I had decided not to get them, and so they said, "See ya," and they let me go. But instead of, being in a situation where I'm like, well, what am I going to do? I know God had said that He was going to restore what was taken from me, that He would be with me in the process, and that He had something better for me. And so that's where we are now, where I'm working as a story creation coach. And I have my Tell Your Story books where I help other women to tell their story, to get that healing, that breakthrough, to write their testimony books, and to be able to put that out there. And so, hey, you get some royalty income. It's great. I want to set up women to be able to be the fullness of what they are in the sense of telling their story. I believe
Yes.
that we're called to influence others. And so, if you especially have a call for leadership on your life or influence, that's where Network for the Kingdom comes in, and we help with that with this Kingdom Club 747, and we help build you up in books, business, branding, and breakthrough. So that's the influencer side of things. But a lot of really great things.
You can see the whole, the call to be a teacher, then, hitting the resistance again, like this whole beautiful unfolding, blossoming that you're still using your teaching and your leadership, but in a way that is serving the Lord and in a greater expression of what you're called to do. I love it. I love it.
Um,
So beautiful. So beautiful. So Danielle, if you could tell the girl that you were, the woman that you were when you went through all these things. Say there's a teacher out in the classroom right now that's a Christian teacher that's, you know, facing the same things that you faced, or a young girl that's in the education system that feels a call in her life that she's hitting. What would you tell that girl
yeah.
and that woman?
So I'll have to say for I do have it here in the afterword. Do you mind if I just read a bit of the afterword because that actually addresses those specifically, just real
No,
quick? Do you mind if
absolutely.
I
Go
read a quick
ahead.
chunk?
Go ahead.
So
Yeah.
at the end of it, I do
No,
address
go for it.
specifically teachers and students, and I said that I pray that this book has been a blessing to you. It's been a challenge to write, but I know that it'll bless someone. My hope is that for you, the student reader, to be better equipped in the classroom, to have your faith strengthened and some of those lingering questions answered. For the teachers in the faith, you have a responsibility to be a believer first. The students who are entrusted to you are no mistake. Be an ambassador of the kingdom first and foremost, and remember the importance of your students' eternity. Professors in the faith are tasked with much difficulty as well. Hold fast to him whom you have believed and persevere. Parents of students, please inquire more deeply about what your children are learning. Students have a right to free and quality education. You have a right to know what they are being taught. I do not condone cancel culture, but I do believe parents need to have a more active role in discussing the content of what their children are being taught with their children. I have been tasked with writing this book and know that God's word will not return to him void. I would love to know how the book has blessed you. And I continually pray for the education system and the impressionable minds that are entrusted to it. Go forth in love, peace, boldness, and perseverance to preach the message of the gospel. So that's my word to you all.
Oh, so good. So good. And Daniela, how can someone, say a woman, wants to tell her story and has a testimony and wants to talk to you, how does she get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I know I have the Linktree link, and in there you can find both how to get copies of this book and then an upcoming book that I have coming out, which is called "Tell Your Story, Turn Your Pain into Purpose," which talks about why you should write a book, why now, and some of my framework for writing, as well as a course that I'm going to be launching very soon, which is super exciting, and a subscription group that goes with it. But if you would like to do that, we can set up a strategy call. So you could just click the link there in the link tree for a strategy call and we can chat.
Awesome. Well, I'll put the link in the show notes with the video so people
Mm,
can contact you. And I've just really enjoyed connecting with you and hearing your story, and I'm just fired up with what I can do for my part. And as a
mm,
mom, it really shows the importance of that firm foundation, you know,
mm,
to launch my son so that he could go out and, you know, have that fight. We know that we're running a race, and we have the battle of putting on the full armor of God to go out and to impact this world for the kingdom. So thank you so much,
Amen.
Daniella. I've
You're
really enjoyed
welcome.
this conversation, and I will meet you back in the broadcast room. Keep living in Him.
Thank you.
Hi, it's Phoenix. I'm just inviting all you wonderful women who want to live a vibrant life to my Facebook group called Supercharge Your Health.